Hello, everybody, and welcome to WASD 20. I am here today with, losing my voice, Pat Kilbane. Pat, how are you
Hey,
today?
good, Nate. Good to see you, man.
Good, you as well. If anyone could just let us know how we're sounding and looking here, that would be great. Make sure we can see and hear us. Let us know if there's any technical difficulties. But in case you don't know, Pat Kilbane is working on a Gary Gygax documentary, and that's why I've invited him here today, just to talk about that. Um,
Yes.
Now, Pat, just for people who don't know you very well, you're one of those guys I think that um, some people know, and for others, you're like, you look familiar. Where do I know you from? Uh, so I remember you because in high school, middle school, and high school, I grew up watching Seinfeld,
Okay,
and
right on.
Feldman, aka Bizarro, Bizarro
Bizarro.
Kramer.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes,
That was Kramer's alter ego in the Bizarro world. Yeah.
yes.
That was a,
Yeah, that was cool. But of course, also renowned from your work with Mad TV, correct?
yeah. Yeah. I was there for 3 years and, yeah, did a lot of impressions, kind of wacky physical comedy. And, I was the Spishak spokesman. I don't know if you remember the shady products like, whatever, home circumcision device for 1995 and radioactive Christmas lights and all kinds of stuff we sold.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that was a thrill because I was like Dan Aykroyd's character on Saturday Night Live, and he was the shady huckster on Saturday Night Live, and
Yeah.
yeah, so I got to do that. I got to be that guy, and yeah, I always liked the real the wiry physical comedians, and to get to do that stuff was super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it I couldn't probably do anymore. I think. Like I did that. There was a sketch we did where I was a double amputee masseur. It's like I had I could wrench my arms behind my back, and just my elbows would stick out from my short sleeve shirt,
Yeah.
and it was a pretty convincing illusion. But I had shoulder trouble for about a week after, and that was when I was 30. So
Yeah.
yeah, that wouldn't happen anymore. Yeah, that'd be a no go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Um, so yeah, you've done quite a bit of work as a comedian and an actor, and
Yes.
recently you've gotten into making RPG stuff kind of your work. So let's start by maybe just give us the elevator pitch for your documentary you're currently working on. It is currently on Kickstarter. How many days does it have left?
It's got about 2 weeks of its 30 days, and we're at about I think 58,000 or something like that. We're hoping to crack six figures, which
Yeah.
is good for a number of reasons. There's a certain cachet that comes with breaking that $100,000 mark, and obviously the funds themselves, that would put us in a really good place to be able to license the footage and images and things that we want. In addition to we want to do a high-end sound mix and a great color pass. Color grading is one of the sort of underrated arts of filmmaking, and you guys just got to have a really good person do it if you want your movie to look professional. So yeah, so that's what we're going for, and it's a story about Gary Gygax and the advent of Dungeons and Dragons. And what's so great, I think, about the story is that it's like a true hero's journey kind of a story. That it's a guy who has tremendous aspirations. He's kind of a lovable loser. I mean, he's a genius, obviously, and we respect him for that. But like from a movie character standpoint, he's a guy who's on food stamps, fixing shoes in his basement. He's fixing shoes with the equipment that his mom loaned him money to buy. He's kicked out of his church for growing his hair too long and smoking cigarettes, and his kids are wearing hand-me-downs, but he loves games. He loves games. He just thinks about them all the time, writes about them all the time, plays them all the time. And he had what Joseph Campbell would call the call to adventure. He when Dave Arneson came over with this interesting Blackmore thing, he was struck right away by the possibilities of it. And he knew, like in a sort of a true hero's adventure kind of a way, that was a moment of truth, that he had to act then, or it's like forever hold your peace, man. You regret it for the rest of your life, kind of thing. So he risked everything, and he made this happen, and it took him on this wild, real life adventure, from this grimy basement to like this mountaintop compound in Beverly Hills, hanging out with Orson Welles and Playboy
Yeah.
bunnies and I made Frank Miller and all kinds of brilliant creative people out there.
Yeah.
The compound parties that they had out there were epic, and there was the cartoon that was going, and they were trying to get a film off the ground. All from his mind and from the toys in his basement, effectively.
Yeah. And so the title of the film is "The Dreams in Gary's Basement." So yeah, I think that's really appropriate. That's where it all started. Um,
Yeah, that's right. I'll go ahead.
oh no, that's fine. You go.
Oh, I was going to say, it's interesting that there's been some pushback about that. People think, it sounds pervy, or I don't know, that it sounds serial killer or something. And for me, it's interesting. It's like, so what makes it pervy? Is it dreams? Is it basement? Or is it Gary? Is it the name Gary? Or uh, I don't know. But it's interesting that we explored some other titles that were more fantasy related. Had fantasy words and stuff in them, but they just sounded like white noise. Just sounded like generic. I mean, you know how it is. There have been so many combinations and permutations of all of the fantasy words and all of the novels and modules and supplements and all the things that it just felt like more of the same. So I thought, this is about Gary, and it's about a guy who came from a very humble place and made something really extraordinary happen. So that was kind of the impetus of it, almost intentionally to go 180 degrees from people's expectations with the name of it.
Yeah, yeah, the exact opposite of fantastical, and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love it.
Thanks.
So before we go further into the documentary, I also wanted to just touch on your work with Dorks of Yore. So you started,
Yes.
is it just a YouTube channel? Is it a website? Or how would you describe Dorks of Yore and what your vision is for that? I've personally enjoyed the videos a lot.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, I suppose, boy, anything that has the word dorks in it, probably you're a little on a high horse to call it vision, maybe. But yeah, I think that it's video based. There's no website. It's all YouTube and Facebook.
Okay.
And I do some memes on Facebook, but mostly it's the sharing of the videos that I create.
Mm-hmm.
And it started out kind of as nerd content in general. Because I guess I just didn't have the confidence yet that that people would respond to the RPG stuff. I honestly felt like that was my own like crazy little world that people would be interested in, but it was quite the opposite. I mean, that is what really got the channel to take off. Once again, that's like the Gary Gygax thing. As soon as you surrender to your bliss, your passions, then all these magical things start happening. So we did a series that was Tim Kask gave a seminar at GaryCon,
Mm-hmm.
and we recorded that, and I cut it up into interesting little short subject videos with the visuals and everything. Tim Kask on TSR was the name of it.
Yeah.
And I do these RPG science videos, and that's kind of my pet niche as far as role playing games goes. Is the science that underlies it all, because I feel, and I'm working on a game system of my own that is heavily scientifically based. So there's sort of an ulterior motive there, but that's my favorite thing. Some people, they do the fun voices, or other people, are big into history and like medieval history. And for me, it's all about, can a dragon really bite through the armor?
Yeah.
How fast is your sword really compared to a mace? All that stuff keeps me up at night.
Yeah. I was really impressed by how in depth it was, and just a lot of fun thinking about that stuff, and
Oh, thanks.
thinking of making a game system that's more representative of actual science. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that one of the pitfalls of it is it can become just way too granular and ridiculous. But
yeah.
I think the theory is that if you can get it to mimic the physics world, like the real physical world, well enough without it being too heavy, crunch wise, then it's not as likely to be broken the way that other rule systems might. because it's like you can't break the real world in a manner of speaking, you know. So if it follows roughly the physics and the timing of the way real world events happen, then it's just going to be harder for there to be some freak rule that can be, you know, twisted and abused. You know? So that's the theory anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. Going back even further, we keep going back in time. I'm doing things backwards, I guess. But
Yeah.
how did you first get into RPGs in the first place? How did you get into D&D?
Yeah, it was a neighbor kid who had the Holmes box set. This would be in '79. And yeah, they were playing, and I think I just showed up one day. I came over one day when they were in the middle of a game, and they gave me a magic user, and I had first level 1 spell, magic missile, and we were playing the B1 in Search of the Unknown, and I was captivated. I was compelled. It's one of those things where you just go home and just think about it all night long, you know.
Yeah.
And ever since then, you know, I moved pretty quickly. The whole neighborhood kind of did pretty quickly into AD&D, and then you know, other kinds of role-playing games and homebrew systems, and you know, and ever since then, effectively. But I would say that the bulk of the hours that I spent, like the real hardcore formative hours, were on AD&D, and then some other things like Twilight 2000 and some Traveler and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
How about you?
Well, for me, I didn't find them until I was age 33.
Wow.
So yeah, it was too late. But no, I mean, it is what it is. And but no, I always tell people in many ways, I was playing role-playing games before that without knowing it. You know,
Right. Yeah.
I was reading D&D novels. We were, we were playing computer role-playing games that. We would like sit down with a pen and paper and make characters for these games, and
Right.
and just make our own worlds and weapons, and
And
so I was always right on the periphery, but
yeah.
didn't actually take the plunge till about 4 years ago. So
Yeah, it's funny, you know, that I think that's the nature of it. I mean, it is a game that is learned through teaching. You know, you can't read about it and really fully understand how it works. And so, yeah, if you don't stumble into the right circumstance where you're taught, you'll just, you know, you'll never pick it up. And I think generally people don't have a curiosity about it unless they're taught, because it's just so hard to wrap your head around without experiencing it.
right, yeah. If I had met one person, one friend somewhere who played, I imagine I would have found it a lot sooner. But
Totally.
the stars did not align. um, So, you're playing role-playing games as a kid,
Yeah.
and then you're getting into comedy and acting. Did you continue to play? What I'm finding now is a lot of people coming to my YouTube channel are saying, I played it when I was a kid and haven't played in decades, but
Right.
getting back into it. Thanks for the help.
Yeah.
Were you one of those people, or did you play continuously through that time?
Well, you know, I played, I mean, yes, certainly I played through college, you know, and it makes it easier when you're always around people, you know. So like when you're growing up, you got all the neighborhood kids, or, you don't have the commitment of a 9-to-5 job. You got your summers, you know, there's all kinds of ways that you can make it happen.
Yeah.
And after college, I went on the road as a stand-up, but I was still living in my hometown. And actually, I was living in my parents' place for like 4 years after college, which is fortuitous. They let me do that because, I was making 150 a week or something as an opening act. You know,
Yeah.
I kind of needed the help. But yeah, so I'm right there in town with my brother and my other friends and all the guys that we played with. You know, so we made that happen, like on odd weekends, or certainly over the holidays and over the summer we would get together and play. But yeah, I think, when I moved to Los Angeles, it became more difficult just because Los Angeles is so spread out. Getting together with people is no joke, man. I mean, it's like anytime you get in your car, you got to plan on 30 to 45 minutes, and that's each way. And so getting everyone together becomes a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But a couple of years ago, I found a fifth edition group that I started playing with, and yeah, they're a bunch of great guys actually from my hometown, coincidentally. But then I found an old school group in Pasadena that I go and play with. I guess that's every couple of months we'll sit down and do a one-off of, the OD&D game, or
Mm.
some old school game like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's been it's always been there. I never took like a giant hiatus or anything like that, but there are times when it became much less frequent in there. But
Yeah.
I always have my books, always have my dice, and it's always always good to go for a game.
Yeah. And what do you think that is the thing that that keeps you in this hobby? That really, what's the draw for you? What's the thing that you get out of it?
Well, boy, that's a big question. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much to it. It engages you on so many levels. There's sort of the creative level, the analytical level, the challenge of the strategy when you're actually playing the game, and then there's just the getting together with friends. Sitting around and joking around, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much better an excuse to get together with friends than a football game or some other kind of thing. So that's a big aspect of it, this social aspect, and the sense of play that I think is largely lost among adults. You can
Mm.
watch a football game and everyone can joke around and stuff, but you're not playing.
Yeah.
And when you get together and play with your buddies, it's as kind of crazy as that sounds when you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. When you get together and play, there's a bonding that happens that it's not like anything else. So it's crazy cool that it operates on all these levels, and sort of the deeper level. This is where I go into like deep nerd territory. Is the psychological growth level, like
Yeah.
the mythological, like Jungian aspects of the game, where there's a symbology of the dungeon and the dragon, and the dungeon and the unconscious mind, the dragon and the constructs that are keeping you from achieving your whatever self-realization, and then the treasure that represents that self-actualization itself. And I really get into that. I mean, there's certain
Hmm.
character classes that I think are good for certain personality types.
Hmm.
Um, and this is interesting. I think 9 times out of 10, people choose the character class that is their kind of natural strong suit, when what they should do is the opposite. That they should choose a character class that's kind of the opposite of what their personality is, because that's the area that where you stand to achieve the most growth
Yeah.
as a person. And yeah, so there's all that stuff too.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, and I think my first ever character, I think I didn't stray too far from the path, and but my second one, which was only like a month later after the first time I played, I
Right.
really tried to be different and found value in that, mainly because I actually wanted to role play. I actually wanted to get into character, and I found that hard to do when I just made a character like me. It was like,
Right.
you might say that makes it easy to do, but no, it's I want to feel like something else
Right.
for a while.
Sure. Yeah. And that's one of the great ways you can sort of stretch, who it is you are, and I
Yeah.
mean, and that's the exercise, like when a psychologist, a therapist does role playing, that you're delving in a safe space into territory that you're not usually comfortable with. And so if you're not usually comfortable getting aggressive, and you're role playing a barbarian and you're speaking in character, suddenly you're practicing, using your outside voice, or whatever. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of value in that, you know. And it doesn't have to be that, it doesn't have to be some sort of deep personal growth exercise, obviously, but that is there for people who want it, no doubt.
Yeah, I feel like that's so much of this game, that there is so much there. You can make it what you want it, and I've got no problem with people who who don't want to make it much more than you know kill monsters and getting loot. But as you said, even that, there's so much more to it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, the going back to the Gygax, and he leveled up. He came out of that basement, with the treasure, and he was a bigger, more interesting person than he had been before he went on that adventure. And that's sort of the micro lesson that we have with every adventure we have. That
Yeah.
when you you take the risk, and you go in there and overcome those obstacles. You come out not just with the money, but with the personal growth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So let's get back into the documentary,
Yeah.
The Dreams in Gary's Basement. How did that come to be? And how was that inspired, and how has it progressed?
Yeah. Well, I think it really started, and I don't know if John Peterson would want to take credit or responsibility or whatever you want to call it, but with Playing at the World. And I know you've read Playing at the World, or at least, hacked
Parts
into
of
it a
it.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And but reading Playing at the World was so gratifying, I thought, because it was so respectful. It was so professionally done. It was scholarly,
Yeah.
and you thought it was footnoted, and it just took this thing that was really important to me and is important to so many people, and treated it with great academic respect.
Yeah.
And I just thought that, as tabletop gamers, we're so used to getting the short end of the stick. I mean, like compared to video games, that there's nothing like like big high dollar elaborate amazing stuff that is done for role-playing games, because the money isn't there.
Yeah.
And so, even though we're deeply passionate about this thing, you don't see great resources. I mean, it's changing some now, but you don't see great resources being poured into some, amazing project. And I felt like, I got so much gratification and validation, really, from reading Playing at the World. I thought, I want to do something like this for the gaming community. I want to create something that is sort of a pillar, of quality and sort of reverence and information, about this game that we love and its history, and in particular, the guy who kind of brought it into the world. So. Yeah, and honestly, at the beginning, we didn't know that it would be a Gary Gygax documentary. I thought at first that it might just be some interesting exploration of games and mythology, and the effect of games, almost like a movie version of what Playing at the World was, kind of an exploration. But it became very clear within about a year of shooting that this had to be Gary's story, and I think that was largely because, when you watch a movie about a thing, if it's about D&D, for instance, it's just harder to identify or to go on that ride, because we want to see the story of a person. It's like, because we see ourselves in that person when we see that story told. And so, it was like Gary's story is everybody's story, or everybody's potential story, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy lived a 3-act life. It's kind of crazy that every movie follows, a good movie anyway, follows this 3-act structure where certain things happen at certain times, and movies that break those rules, unless they do so brilliantly, like Quentin Tarantino or somebody, tend to be bad. But even a documentary really needs to follow that 3-act structure, and Gary had all of the ups and downs of a hero's journey movie, starting, like at the end of Act 1, where he makes the big decision, okay, I'm going to form a company, I'm going to publish this game. And then, in the middle of the movie, you've got the rising excitement of Dungeons and Dragons taking off, sort of peaking with this horrible satanic panic and Dallas Egbert stuff, where it's like, it's taking on sort of dark overtones, but the rocket is still just going up and up and up. To a point where it's like tremendous, almost excess, what he's experiencing in Hollywood, and, all of the fun and the crazy parties and the success on the screen, to, a point where it all comes to a head. And there's a big fight, not only for his game and his company, but for kind of who he is, he's kind of got to make a stand.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a great story, and so Playing at the World certainly delves into it. There have been a few other books since then as well. How have how have those been of use to you, or have you tried to kind of almost push those away to say, like, this needs to be its own thing, this film I'm creating?
Right. No, I felt like it was important to look at it all. you know, and there's some people who are like, yeah, I don't want to be influenced by those outside sources, but because this is based on fact, you know, that I'm not, you know, not just dreaming up a world on my own, that I felt like I had to know, okay, what, you know, what is the truth, or what is my understanding of the truth going to be here? So yeah, not only did I read every page of Playing at the World and annotate it all, which was weeks just in itself, but yeah, also Michael Whitwer's book, and whatever the name was of that graphic novel that came out, you know, I read that as well, just scooped it up and
Rise of the Dungeon Master.
Yes, yeah, that was fun. There are a couple little like historical mistakes in there, but largely it was pretty cool. I thought, you know, the guy did a good job. Yeah. And then you're left with sort of the interesting task of seeing what you agree with and disagree with based on the evidence that you have. You know, the nice thing is that we don't have to choose. We can just show two opinions. You know, we don't necessarily have to pick what narrative we're going to go with. We can say, yeah, this guy thought this and this guy thought this, and you, the viewer, can kind of make up your mind. Yeah. But yeah, in answer to your question, everything I could get my hands on, I tried to consume it and get the best understanding I could of what happened.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to go when you say, you know, just presenting multiple points of view. And you know, I think I don't remember what book it was. It might have been Michael Whitwer's Empire of Imagination, where and it was probably in Of Dice and Men too a little bit, but this conflict between Arneson and Gygax in a way, and how, you know, I mean, when you're dealing with conflict, it's tempting to take sides, and sometimes one side is more in the right, in fact, right? And I just remember one point where the author of whatever I was reading was saying, you know, what happened with Arneson? Was it that he was just not able to produce, or was there, you know, that's kind of the story we get, is that, you know, in actually joining TSR and getting down to work, he wasn't producing. But, you know, is there something more to it? Was there some inner politics that we don't know about? And, you know, and just kind of presenting that possibility, and not being too quick to rush to judgment. So.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and obviously all that is really tricky. You know, the people from the Twin Cities area are obviously, you know, partisan to Arneson, and, you know, the people closer to the Wisconsin side of things are kind of more for Gygax, and I feel like I have a balanced, you know, kind of view of the thing, but some people really want to see it one way or the other, and it's obviously it's quite nuanced. But there's no question that Arneson made, you know, massive contributions. And I think that the sort of the gross form of the thing was sort of Arneson, his own ideas, you know, pieced together with things other people in his gaming group were doing. And you know, it's, I almost hate to speculate on video, but you know, where people are so opinionated, but I think what you're saying is accurate from the interviews that we've had, that Dave Arneson, for one, he was not a big fantasy guy. You know, he was huge into history. History was his love. And so the idea of dedicating himself professionally to 9-to-5 fantasy, I think, was already going to be a challenge. And the other thing was, you know, what you're mentioning in terms of his focus. You know, is the guy going to be able to sit down and grind out the work, or, you know, manage people and direct their actions, or, you know, and I don't think, you know, there was someone I think it was Mike Bernard, who played in Dave's groups and knew Dave well. I asked him, do you think that it was a matter of when this became work, when it became homework effectively? Is that where he lost interest? And I think Mike said, I think that's a fair way of characterizing it. So not everybody's cut out for that, you know. Dave was a masterful dungeon everyone who plays with Dave, who played with Dave as a dungeon master, talks about how extraordinarily creative he was, and great on flying by the seat of his pants, you know, creative in the moment, you know, which is its own kind of genius. But the other side of it, sort of the you know, the mathematically brained side of it, you know, where, okay, I'm going to sit down and I am going to grind this out, and then I'm going to get on the phone with a printer and I'm going to argue with them. You know, it's like that's just a whole other skill set. And I think that's the genius really of Gary, is to find somebody who has both those sides really strong, where they can lead, they can organize, and they can create and imagine,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know if you would agree with this, but it seems to me that it's fair to say that, Gary Gygax probably would not have created Dungeons and Dragons as we know it if Dave Arneson hadn't provided that kind of spark, the idea in a way, and maybe some others too. Maybe you could talk about Brownstein, David A. Wesley,
Correct. Yeah.
and these things that led, Gary would not have created D&D if it weren't for those first steps. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I'd absolutely agree. Yeah, yeah. I think, and some people. It's funny. You see the sort of the short stick given to both sides. You hear some people say, well, Dave provided the spark, and then Gary was the tinder who kind of ran with it. Then it's like, yeah, it was. I would say it's even more than a spark. I mean, it was a really substantial kind of a collection of ideas that was brought to Gary's house by Dave.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of things, you have people that say, well, Arneson really created it, and Gary just kind of organized it. And it's like, nah, that's not true either. I mean, Gary really made massive contributions to the thing. He not only really made it playable and presented it in a way that people could understand and communicate, but he added a real sense. There's a sensibility about the game, a certain kind of humor. There's humor in it, but the stakes are still high when you're playing. So that combination of the fun and the silly with the sort of the mortal danger that your character experiences. And I think even if you read forwards that are written by Gary Gygax, you see his sense of wonder. You see a guy who's inviting you in, come with me to this extraordinary magical world, join us. And you just don't see that with, if you read, Mike Carr, Tim Kask, or some of the other guys who've written forwards, it's all excellent material. They do a great job. But whatever that thing is that Gary had, I feel like that was the sort of the glue that held together all of these disparate ideas and turned it into something extremely compelling.
Yeah, it's that kid who sat in his bedroom reading pulp, right? I mean, it's that same wonder that he never lost.
Right.
Reading Conan and all this stuff, right?
Totally. And really, you mentioned Dave Wesley. I mean, all of these ideas, and John Peterson covers this in Playing at the World. There is a whole community of people who are communicating via getting together at conventions and their gaming groups and writing for these zines that are floating around. And there are just a huge number of ideas being exchanged. And, Dave Wesley had dug up Strategos from the university library, this 19th century, like basically a Civil War games book that couldn't have been more dry and weird a thing for someone who wanted to have fun. But, that was where the idea of the referee, or, which later became the dungeon master, was sort of unearthed, kind of archaeologically dug up and reintroduced into play. And so, from that old work, comes Brownstein, which was a Napoleonic era, the first role-playing game, effectively. And then Dave Arneson says, I'm going to run a medieval Brownstein, which became Blackmore. And then Gary did his Greyhawk, which is his version of Blackmore. But it's like, and there was a whole gang of people in Lake Geneva and a whole gang of people in the Twin Cities that were sharing ideas. So in some ways, it's unfair to single anybody out and say, yeah, it was this guy.
Yeah.
Because Arneson borrowed heavily and Gygax borrowed heavily, and there's so much collaboration. But I think it's part of it is our nature as people. We want to know, okay, who's the guy? No, really, who's the guy?
Yeah.
And part of it, though, is I think historically, there usually is a place where the funnel comes down to a guy, where like Henry Ford did not invent the internal combustion engine, but he was kind of the guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you can make arguments about what kind of person he was or whatever else, but he was kind of the guy. And I think similarly, it's like, Gary's kind of the guy that, that all of the different things that were required of him to make this happen.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I had a question earlier from, where is it? Well, someone was asking how many, here it is, Tim Jones. Do you know offhand how many people you interviewed for the film?
Gosh. Hey, Tim. Tim, actually, a TSR legend. If it's the same, there's probably more than one Tim Jones in the world. But
Yeah.
if this is if this is the Tim Jones we saw at GaryCon, then we're honored to have you, sir. I guess a couple of dozen. We would have liked to have interviewed more, I think, and there was a matter of our limited budget, but I think it was about 20, something like that. And obviously a lot of other kinds of footage we got as well. Matt Renoir, who's our director of photography, is a master with the drone. So we got a lot of amazing aerial views of Lake Geneva, and that shot of Beverly Hills that we got. That's him on the drone. He's really good with that stuff.
Yeah.
And in answer to your question, about 24, but we would like to do more, and I think that's part of what the Kickstarter will allow. We'd like to pick up like a half a dozen more, and we've got some exciting names in the mix as well that we think are going to add a lot of oomph to what we've already got.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. Tim Jones says hi. He says yes. It's the Tim Jones.
It is I. It is I. The Tim Jones.
Yeah.
Anybody's name you see in the AD&D credits and like in the core rulebooks credits, it's like, good to have you, sir.
Yes, indeed. We are honored by your presence. That's cool. So what exactly, has been your role in the film as a director? Have you been present for all of these interviews? Have you been the one asking the questions and on location everywhere the film is being taken?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's and that's really important. I think, you have to build the structure. I was talking about the 3-act structure, and within that, there are chapters. Like if you watch any documentary, you'll see that very subtly, the subject matter changes about every 2 minutes. They'll make some sort of kind of slick transition into it. And it'll be like a bunch of mini 2-minute documentaries that are put together into this collage of a feature-length film. And so I knew it was important as soon as possible to establish what those component pieces would be. And then those things become the questions you ask. And obviously you want to be ready to veer off of the beaten path if something interesting comes up. But if you want to have a movie with as many people as possible, you want to hit all of those points. So we did really, Luke Gygax was a huge help with us at GaryCon. Those guys worked hard to set aside space so we could have a place to interview people. He introduced us to many people. And John Peterson also, I should point out, was very key in making introductions for us and has been a great sort of mentor and consultant throughout this whole process. Really great guy. The whole community has been amazing, to be honest. So we knocked down probably 3/4 of our interviews at those 2 GaryCons, and then others picked up, here and there. But I felt like it was important, being a person who's obviously invested in the film emotionally, and also as a person who has a history with the game, that I would be equipped to ask the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. So I just want to remind people that there is a link to the Kickstarter in the video description right at the top there. So definitely go check it out. Watch the trailer after you watch this interview. Let's see. There was another question here. And I want to say hey to Nathan from Earl T. Gray TV. I think he interviewed you a couple of years ago for a Brigade Con thing. And I got to meet him in person for the first time at GaryCon last year.
You did a lot of looking up then, didn't you?
Yes.
Like Nate,
yes.
Is he what, 6'6" or 7?
He's got a good 3 inches on me. I'm 6'4", I would say. So he's probably 6'6" or 7. Yeah. And you're not a short guy either, Pat.
No, I'm 6'5", and it's funny. I didn't remember meeting you when you mentioned it, and for some reason I figured you were. I don't know. I guessed you were 5'10" or something. And I saw a picture of you with Mike Whitwer on one of your episodes. I'm like, Nate's tall, man.
Yeah. He's a big guy. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's some giants out there in RPG land. But there's a question from Andrew.
Nathan and I were talking about wearing Null costumes to one of the matching Null costumes to one of the GaryCons, and that would be especially cool with a couple of tall guys.
That would be. Oh man, that's great. Well, this conversation is. I told Pat that I'm on the fence about GaryCon this next year, just because I kind of got to pick and choose with family time and stuff, and it's it's a couple nights out of town. But as this conversation progresses, and now Nathan's here and Tim Jones is here, I'm like, I got to get back to GaryCon. I can't
That's a
wait.
good one, man.
Yep.
So,
Question
Nathan,
from
question?
Andrew says, question for Pat. The social contract part of the RPG is far superior to first-person video games. Was Gary motivated by that aspect of D&D, the social contract?
Interesting. I guess I don't know. You'd have to define that for me. I'm not familiar with that as it relates to RPGs. Just the sort of the social gathering of people.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the notion that we gather with kind of a common understanding, and
Mm.
although it's not
Uh,
formalized, there is well, sometimes it is formalized, right? The session zero where we kind of form the social contract, perhaps about what will the
right.
tone be of this game, what things what yeah do we want to include, etc. But I think more often it's unspoken. So.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's an interesting idea, and I guess I'll explore it a little, and maybe I'll be off base in terms of what the question intends. But yeah, there's one person that we interviewed who talked about how Gary Gygax understood that role-playing games benefited from network effects,
mhm.
and that he was as a guy who was trying to sell role-playing games, he was in the network business. And Gary obviously did all of the right things when it came to creating a network of people. So there's not only the game that is social and is learned by teaching, but then there are the publications. That when TSR was formed, excuse me, there were the magazines immediately. They went from sort of stapled together zines to Dragon magazines, like a legit publication that had what was the precursor to internet forums. You had people writing in asking questions and sage advice where questions are answered by the experts and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, the other part of it is the convention. You create a place where people can then gather and play together and exchange ideas, and that sort of creates a landmark in the calendar for when you are going to join physically with your community and play and share ideas. So you've got whatever sort of the micro part where you're gathered around the table. You've got the part where the publications are holding everyone together over the course of the year, and then you've got these periodic gatherings at Gen Con where everyone is physically face to face and sort of strengthening their bonds as a community. So Gary was a great leader that way. He got people charged up. He got people excited, and I think that was one of his great gifts. Without which, I don't think all this would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Um, there was another question about when you estimate the film will be distributed.
Well, there's according to Kickstarter, we're looking at April. And then there's the distribution proper, where you sign with a distributor and they end up, putting it on Netflix or wherever it's going to go. That is going to come much later. But April is when we're looking at for delivering the digital downloads and the DVDs and Blu-rays, and then a lag after that. And now where you kind of have a quandary is if you get to a place where it's like, okay, we can either burn this thing right now to DVD and Blu-ray and send it to our backers on time, or we can polish it up to a full distribution quality and then send it out to them. So it's like you can either have it now not fully perfected, or you can have it like pristine with multiple stereo tracks and all that stuff after it's all been spruced up. So we'll have to, I don't know. We'll have to ask that sincere question to our backers when the time comes. But yeah, certainly we'll have a really sweet cut of it done by sometime in early April to be sent out at the end of April.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So are you planning on maybe sneaking in a couple more interviews at GaryCon this year, or would that be too late?
That's a great question. And, it's that funny thing where at a certain point you got to call it a day,
Yeah.
and there's always something more that you want. But I guess we'll just have to see where we are. It's with nonlinear editing, it's easy to squeeze new things in. And if we're at a point in the cut where we're like, we could probably use another little something about this or whatever, maybe we'll bring a crew and, mop up a couple of great interviews, with some of the legends that show up at GaryCon. So yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. I want to say hey to Larry in the house. Larry was at GaryCon too. Got to meet him there. He said,
Larry Hamilton?
Yeah, Larry Hamilton. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, as I'm thinking about it now, I think he might have been the one who, when we were walking through the hall, was like, "Do you know Pat?" And I was like, "I recognize that dude."
I remember that now.
Yeah.
I remember that now.
And it was right after he had introduced me to Satine Phoenix too. So Larry's my man.
Yeah, he's a Hollywood hookup right there.
He is. So anyway, he asked, "What is the most surprising and interesting things you learned in the process making the film?"
Surprising and interesting things. Gosh.
Because you obviously did a lot of reading beforehand and learned a lot. But I mean, were there still some things that, I never heard that aspect of this story before? Or
yeah. Well, I mean, the idea of the satanic panic and the effect it had on the Gygax family, and that there were death threats, and Gary had a driver who Gary didn't drive, so this chauffeur guy drove him around, and certainly by the Hollywood years, that chauffeur also had a gun and martial arts training, and so and that's kind of strange. And Flint Dille was telling the story about how there was some kind of fracas that happened at one of the bars down the hill from Gary's compound, and this martial arts guy had to bust out all his moves and put some guy, straighten him out. But and it's funny too that Flint Dille talked about how that compound was a little bit run down. It was in its prime, maybe in the 30s or 40s, but by the 80s, even though it had this amazing view, it felt a little creepy. And this was only 10 years after the Manson murders. It just was, and with the satanic stuff, there was kind of an air of darkness around. And it was a good time and everything he made clear, but there was a tinge of danger in it all.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting. And I think the other big thing would be the degree to which people disagree about the Gygax versus Arneson thing. And personally, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's just as easy to respect the contributions of both.
Yes.
But there's some people who are really dug in like ticks on one side or the other, and just so passionate about it that there's kind of no discussing it in some cases.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I think as the hobby is such a collaborative experience, it's clear that so was the creation, and the creation of so much more than just D&D.
Right. Yeah.
There's so
Well,
much.
it's interesting, that things really change when something becomes a business. That it was pure hobby. I mean, nobody was making any money. That I don't know what copies of Chainmail were selling for, a couple of bucks or something like that, and no one was really looking at a career in any of this. But as soon as that money became really real, not only is there contention for, okay, well, who owns what, but there's also kind of a circling of the wagons. TSR itself starts sending out cease and desist letters saying, hey, you can't make character sheets for our game, when really the whole D&D game was built on collaboration and everybody freely sharing. So, at some point, somebody just throws the stoplight and says, okay, this is serious business now. This is not just a bunch of friends, messing around with stuff. This is intellectual property. This is copyright. This is big business.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, so I see 3 more questions that I'm going to do here, and then we better call it a night. But first off, where is it? Oh, outside of Kickstarter, how will the movie be distributed?
Well, you sign a contract with a distributor that you find somebody that, I mean, in the absence of working with a distributor, you can go to these companies called aggregators, and they're the ones who properly format the movie and bring it to somebody like iTunes and Amazon and those people.
Mm-hmm.
But we plan to work with we plan a formal partnership with a distributor who will be able to handle all of that. So yeah, there are companies that work specifically with documentaries, and there are companies that have worked specifically on nerd culture documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that if we execute this the way that we plan to, we shouldn't have any difficulty at all handling that. But that does take time. And there are a lot of specifications also that you have to meet for the distributor, really exacting technical specifications that spend a lot of time with the in post working on that stuff.
Yeah. Larry asked, did you interview Jeff Perrin?
We tried. We tried. His daughter Vicky is great, and we see her every year at GaryCon. And I think I asked her at the first two GaryCons, and then and before the third GaryCon that we went to, and we just could never kind of figure it out. So we definitely wanted to interview Jeff Perrin. The guy's a legend, and with Chainmail created one of the key components of what we recognize now as Dungeons and Dragons, but we just didn't get the opportunity.
Yep. And then last question from Nathan Earl T. Gray. Any spin-off project ideas this one has spawned, or maybe we could just say, what's next? This is going to be wrapping up in the next 6 months or so, or maybe a little more than that. So what's next for you?
Well, I mean, this is going to be massively time consuming for the foreseeable future, So, we do want to kind of have it completely out into the world by 2019, but or not by 2019, during 2019.
Yeah.
But there's actually a comedy project that I've got in the works. I can't really talk about, and another role-playing game world film that we're working towards, but are not sure about it. I'm actually trying to not overcommit myself so I can make sure to see this through as I've promised.
Yep.
And but those are the two things. There's an hour comedy special, and the other thing is another feature documentary in the world of RPGs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're excited for that. But as you say, clearly a lot of work left to do. So, we will eagerly await. And as several people said in the chat, and I agree, take your time and get it right.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, but
I appreciate that sentiment. Yeah. I'm sure there are a couple trolls out there who disagree, but that's super cool. The community's been so cool about that. Yeah. I mean, so supportive that it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, everyone who's watching, definitely go check it out on Kickstarter. Link in the video description again, and help this film generate support it needs to get more interviews, get the distribution, and get to the level of quality that will make it just an excellent film, and hopefully even draw more people into this wonderful hobby through the story that of Gary Gygax's life and the beginnings of Dungeons and Dragons.
I hope
Pat,
so.
Any last words before we sign off here?
No, I guess just thanks. Keep doing what you're doing. It's awesome. And and just touching briefly on what you just said, there have been people who are gamers and have been gamers for a long time who have commented online who are like, I had no idea. They watched the trailer and like, I had no idea that Gary's back was against the wall and he was broke, and and this was kind of like a Hail Mary for him, Yeah. And I think so. I think you're right. I think it's going to give people who aren't gamers an appreciation for what this is, and I think even gamers are going to have a better appreciation of our own history.
Yeah, absolutely. As a history teacher, I can absolutely concur. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Pat. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks for the great questions. Greatly appreciated. And Pat, we'll have to chat again sometime very soon. Maybe
I'd love to,
Gary.
man. Thank you.
All right. Take care,
Take
everybody.
care, bro. Bye.